Hello, good people. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, and sayer of true things. Recently, you may have seen a protester holding up a sign that says Queers for Palestine. If this sign struck you as odd, you would not be the only one. I heard someone compare it to something like Blacks for the KKK or something silly like that. Now, anyone who has at least a little bit of information of how LGBTQ folks are regarded and treated in the Arab world knows that Queers for Palestine doesn't make a lot of sense. Or does it? The more I thought about this, the more apparent it became that Queers for Palestine actually makes a lot of sense. Let's set this up with an illustration that I learned from a medical condition that many people that I know actually suffer from. Eczema, asthma, and food allergies all have very different symptoms. Eczema is a skin condition that makes you itch and causes visible irritation. Asthma, on the other hand, is a respiratory condition that causes people that have difficulty breathing to struggle when they should have no trouble breathing. And food allergies seems to be the weirdest of them all, causing people's faces to swell and their airways to close simply from eating fish or nuts, or sometimes even from drinking milk. Now, on the surface, they don't seem like they have anything to do with one another, but if you suffer from one of these conditions, you likely have at least one of the others, and very often all three of them. This is because, although they all manifest differently, they all have a common root. This illustration can help us understand how Queers for Palestine is actually something that we should expect if you understand the spiritual roots of queerness and radical Islam. Once we tie them together, it'll be kind of a aha moment. Now, let's start this analysis where we should start all cultural analyses, and that's with the Bible. Now, I know that some of you don't actually believe the Bible, but that has nothing to do with whether or not it provides the best explanation of this phenomenon. Also, you not believing the Bible is not a problem I can fix, so there's that. The key to understanding the Queers for Palestine connection comes from the story of Cain and Abel. The Bible records that Abel offered a sacrifice to God that was accepted, but Cain offered a sacrifice to God that was not accepted. Abel received God's blessing. Cain did not. Cain became distraught over this, but God said to him, "There's no reason for you to be upset because all you have to do is humble yourself and offer a sacrifice in the way I prescribed." Cain, of course, did not take God's advice. Instead, he convinced himself that Abel was in fact the main problem. Naturally, if you have a problem, you try to remove the source of said problem. So, driven by his anger, bitterness, and resentment, he murdered his brother in cold blood. What we see in this story is how the seeds of resentment and pride make people irrational and violent. Everyone wants the good things God provides, i.e. his blessings. But when a person refuses to change the way they think or live in order to receive the blessings of God, that stubbornness quickly becomes resentment towards those who have no problem doing what God said. Their commitment to their false standard makes them prime candidates to be consumed by their dedication to their own sin. Now, the story actually has so many layers to it that I could spend an hour or so on it and barely scratch the surface, but suffice it to say that the spirit of Cain lives on in those who are committed to a false standard. They hate those who have those blessings and blame all their problems on them. The Bible says, though, that God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that will he also reap. There is no version of reality where you can disobey God and have it work to your benefit. Now, just take a moment to consider all of the extreme left-wing political groups and what they have in common. They hate the wealthy and the productive. They say things like, eat the rich, think evil of those who create products and services that make life better and generate wealth. They almost always see the success of others as the source of their problems. LGBTQ activism is simply one of many manifestations of the spirit of Cain. It makes sense. The so-called queer community wants their relationships and pursuits to be viewed in the same way we view traditional marriage, except for the fact that their relationships and pursuits are fundamentally different from traditional marriage. The union of a man and a woman produces children and provides the optimal environment for children to be raised. No matter how much they insist on the moral equivalence between actual marriage and the relationships they form, the fact will always remain that only heterosexual unions can sustain a society and therefore have a special status. Everyone who acknowledges this fact is apparently an oppressor. I could go on, but let's shift our focus now to the Palestinian resistance. I don't think we could produce a better example of what it looks like when a group of people build their entire identity around resentment and hatred for another group. What's more is that despite claims that Palestinian suffering is due to Jewish occupation, Palestinians were offered land and an opportunity to self-govern no fewer than 3 times. all of which they rejected, after which they embarked on a never-ending quest of bloodthirsty violence against the Jews who were willing to compromise in those same scenarios. There's no version of reality where it can be rightly said that the Palestinians are suffering because of what Jews have done to them. Their plight is completely of their own making. Not to mention the fact that as their hatred and resentment of the Jews has intensified, the prosperity and progress of Israel grows greater and greater with each passing year, along with the support of the most hated nation in the world by those who thrive on grievance and resentment, that is, the United States of America. Israel and the United States are virtually tailor-made to draw the ire of those who hate God's principles. Now, Black Lives Matter, which is pretty much indistinguishable from any other grievance-driven left-wing political group, uses the exact same playbook to describe themselves that they use to describe Palestine. They see the American police officer as an occupier and an oppressor. According to them, a heavy police presence in black neighborhoods has nothing to do with the, say, 7,000 plus murders that take place in those neighborhoods every single year, but rather to remind black and brown bodies of their perpetual subjugation. Those murders, by the way, are half of all murders in the U.S., despite blacks being only 13% of the population. According to leftist groups, the high crime and violence in black communities is merely a convenient excuse to oppress and occupy. And of course, blacks aren't suffering because of the disintegration of the family, low social and academic standards, and abandonment of godly principles, but rather that the man is trying to keep them down. Every social problem in the black community can be traced back to white supremacy, according to them. It's the same story with Israel's so-called occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. Israel's military isn't there because Islamic extremists stir up hatred and spend every waking moment of their lives thinking of how to kill Jews, but rather to make life inconvenient for the Arab residents of the region for no other reason other than the fact that they are evil expansionists bent on Arab subjugation. And the fact that every major conflict ever experienced in the region was initiated by the Arab inhabitants of the land is irrelevant, merely a convenient excuse to occupy the land unjustly. This is the spirit of Cain in all of its grotesque glory. The fact that one group kills queer people and the other celebrates them is merely a cosmetic difference. They both rely on suppression of free speech, violence, and terror in various forms to advance their ideology. They stand in solidarity in their hatred of the one true God and the principles he has established. No matter what their exterior looks like, under the hood, they have the same engine. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, friends. Can you reasonably say that there's some sort of connection between the LGBTQ activists in the West and the Palestinian so-called resistance? I'd like to know what your thoughts are. I want you to leave a note down at the bottom, leave me a like, and especially leave a like in this particular case because I have a feeling that the algorithm designers and the cyber thugs that run this organization are going to find a way to suppress this content. But if you interact with it, give me that like, give me that thumbs up. We can fight against the algorithm. Till next time, friends, God bless you.